I want to hand the microphone over to someone who is a good friend of Israel, a good friend of mine. Ashley Church is with the Israel Institute of New Zealand. He's one of the directors with Dr. David Kuhlman and Perry Trotter up in Auckland. Ashley lives locally in Hawke's Bay here, and I want to hand the microphone to him. Let's give Ashley a warm welcome.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, folks. It's great to see you here. It would have been really easy, given that there was a ceasefire a few days ago, and given that we haven't got quite the salubrious weather we would normally have expected, to have not come along this afternoon. So the fact that you're here and you're prepared to continue standing for Israel is a testament to everybody here, and it's a fantastic endorsement of the position that Nigel's just outlined. But I want you, before I start, I just want to do something. I want you to put into your mind's eye to imagine a situation where you've just left this afternoon and you've gone out there onto the mall, and there's a guy out there and he's with his family, he's with his wife and 2 kids, and he's walking along and he's minding his own business, and a couple of thugs come out and attack him, and they start beating into him. Don't know why. They start punching him and kicking him, and for whatever reason, maybe because he thinks he's protecting his wife and his children, maybe because he thinks that peace is the right approach, he doesn't do anything initially. He absorbs the punches and he just waits it out, thinking maybe it will go away. And while this is happening, a crowd gathers around, a crowd circles them, and rather than doing what you would expect the crowd to do, they start cheering for the attackers, and they start encouraging them, and they start goading them on and telling them what they're doing is fantastic and that they should keep doing it. And after this carries on for about 2 minutes, he decides he better do something about it, and he starts punching back and starts hitting back, and he starts actually landing a couple of shots. And when he does that, the crowd does something really strange. The crowd starts booing the guy who's being attacked and start attacking him and start saying that he's a bully. Now that might sound like a really weird story, but that's a really good analogy of exactly what's happening right now in the Middle East. You understand the analogy I'm drawing there? That's what's happening right now in the Middle East. And it's not just happening in the Middle East, but it's happening here in New Zealand. If you read media, if you listen to media at the moment in New Zealand, and you were to get an impression of what was going on without any background information, you would come away thinking something's wrong in Israel and those poor Palestinians. The question you've got to ask yourself is, why is that? And so you look at the state of Israel and you start to say, okay, well, what is this country? Let's maybe see if there's something about the makeup of the country itself that would lead us to think that. And so let's look at how that impacts on us here in New Zealand just very quickly. There's a political element to this, and there's a media element. If we look at the political element, New Zealand has always been, when I say always, up until about 2002, a very strong supporter of Israel. So if you go back to 1947, you'll know that Israel was formed in 1948, but it was formed as a result of a resolution by the United Nations in 1947, in which New Zealand was one of 33 nations that voted in favour of petition. The petition was simply about dividing the nation between Israel and the Palestinians. And so we've had a proud record between 1947 right up until 2002 of being very, very strongly in support of Israel. Now, to put that in some context, every year there are about 21 resolutions that are rolled out at the United Nations. They're basically just proposals that are put forward by a number of groups, usually dominated by the Islamic countries in the United Nations, which are designed to condemn Israel. Now, up until 2002, New Zealand consistently voted against those resolutions. Either abstained, which it did in a few cases, but in most cases actually voted against them. From 2002 onward, right up until this year, New Zealand has consistently moved right to the other side of that position, and it has been a nation which has voted against Israel consistently. Now, to put that in some context, of those 21, I think I mentioned before, there's 21 resolutions per year that are passed at the United Nations. There's 27 resolutions in total that are against individual nation states. 21 of them are about Israel, they're attacking Israel. 6 of them about all of the other nations in the world combined. So that gives you some idea of how overwhelmingly biased the United Nations is toward Israel. So where's New Zealand sat on that? So in 2017, just to pick a year, if you look at those 21 resolutions, and before I give you the New Zealand numbers, let me first give you the numbers of a nation that we would regard ourselves as having similar values with, Canada. So in 2017, of those 21 resolutions, Canada voted it abstained from 3 of those resolutions, and it voted in favour of, it voted against, which means it supported Israel. It voted against 18 of them. In the same year, New Zealand abstained from 4 and voted in favour of 17 of them. So that's the difference between ourselves and a nation like Canada. I could do the same with Australia, the same with the United States. New Zealand is an outlier, and not in a good way. New Zealand is an outlier in that it has become more and more antagonistic toward Israel. And while we're a little bit like frogs in the frying pan, while we've sat and slowly watched this happen, New Zealand has become the poster child for being anti-Israel. So it's not just a case of us standing against evil in the world, it's a case of us recognising that this is happening right here at home at the hands of our own government, and not just this current government. The national government was just as bad in this space. In fact, the Israel Institute, of which I'm a member, was formed as a result of a resolution that was passed by Murray McCully in the previous national government, and some of you will remember that it was the Security Council Resolution 2334, which again was about condemning Israel at the Security Council level. So politically we're not in a good space.